Welcome, everybody. I'm Dick Morningstar, the chairman of the Global Energy Center here at the Atlantic Council. I am going to be very brief since we have a short time that we have the senators here today, but I do want to welcome you all to what will be, I think, a great presentation on the future of nuclear technology and nuclear innovation. So my job is to introduce the wonderful Sherry Goodman, who is a director of the Atlantic Council on our board. And you on the executive committee? And on our executive committee. And she is the president and CEO of the Consortium for Ocean Leadership. Among the many things that she has done also was the Deputy Undersecretary of Defense during the Clinton administration for environmental security, and is a real expert on issues relating to climate and security and its effect on the military. So with that, I'm going to introduce Sherry, who will more formally introduce the program. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador, and good afternoon, senators and guests. I'm honored to be here as a board director of the Atlantic Council and to welcome our distinguished speakers to discuss this important topic of energy, nuclear energy innovation and modernization. I have known both Senator Inhofe and Senator Whitehouse for quite some time, and I'm very pleased to be here to provide some introductory remarks. In the 1980s, during the Cold War, I served on the staff of the Senate Armed Services Committee, where Senator Inhofe sits today, at a time when many of our nation's nuclear plants, particularly in the nuclear weapons complex, were failing due to lack of innovation and modernization. I made countless visits to our weapons complex facilities to help the Armed Services Committee determine a course forward. In the 1990s, when I served in the Department of Defense, Senator Inhofe was my chairman as chair of the SASC Readiness Subcommittee. I even have had the privilege of flying with Pilot Inhofe in his jalapeno plane around Oklahoma to tour military installations and their environmental readiness. Thank you, Senator Inhofe. I remember our travels fondly. In recent years, I've had the opportunity to travel with Senator Whitehouse to the Verkunda International Security Gathering and have witnessed firsthand his leadership on oceans and many other areas. Their bipartisan collaboration is extremely important for our nation's energy future. And as they have reminded me, they've long been collaborating. It's just the House they really need to bring along. Nuclear energy comprises a significant portion of our nation's energy mix today and will continue to be part of an all-of-the-above energy strategy for this country going forward. That said, our nuclear industry is facing several challenges, among which are aging infrastructure and several more plants closing, and costs and long permitting times associated with building traditional nuclear plants, and the long-standing problem of how to manage our nuclear waste, although I know that Secretary Moniz has some ideas on that score, and prevent related security threats, particularly with the increasing risk posed by terrorists and non-state actors. Yet our nation is known for creating opportunities out of challenges, and at a time of continued fiscal, energy, environmental, and security challenges, nuclear energy is one area that will provide us with such an opportunity. Progress is indeed being made in the industry right now, changing technologies and types of controls to advance capabilities to address safety and help maintain reliability and resilience during extreme weather events are part of enhancing the future prospects of such plants and of the industry more broadly. With Russia and China already developing more advanced reactor designs, the U.S. needs to play a leadership role by investing in research and development and in moving technologies toward deployment and commercialization. And that's why I'm so pleased with the initiative that we'll hear from from the two senators in just a moment. I want to commend them for your leadership efforts and for working across party lines. As some of you might be aware, these two senators do not always agree on environmental or energy issues, and they come to this from different perspectives, yet you've come together and have supported this legislation to help advance innovative nuclear technologies And in this difficult political climate, it's all the more refreshing to see you working together on these matters that are critical for energy, economic, and our national security. Thank you both very much.
Okay, that sounds good. Sure, it's just really great to see you again. And in fact, I remember fondly that day of traveling around. I can't remember whether I had to go through any bad weather or not, but we had an enjoyable time. Thanks for your. Well, I think everyone knows that I've been a real strong supporter of nuclear forever, and certainly since I became chairman. I can't believe it was 20 years ago that on the committee called Environment and Public Works, the subcommittee is called Clean Air and Nuclear. And that's what I chaired back in 20 years ago. So it's been really, we've been into this for a long period of time. Our existing nuclear plants provide thousands of jobs and millions of dollars in benefits to local communities, and they've run safely for decades, and many will serve the country for years to come. However, I believe we also need to look to the future. This is something that Senator Whitehouse and I strongly agree on, even though we have differing views as to why nuclear energy is vitally important, which we will not discuss, or this would develop into another subject that wouldn't entertain. It might be entertaining, I don't know. Our strong support for the nuclear energy is shared by our colleagues, Senator Booker and Senator Crapo, a Democrat and a Republican. Together, we developed a bill, S-2795, entitled the Nuclear Energy Innovation Modernization Act. Innovation has come to the nuclear industry. There are many new companies, nuclear startups, that are out there. In fact, they're pursuing concepts that advance the safety and security and efficiency. However, two of the biggest challenges these innovators face are the cost and delays of trying to navigate a regulatory system that was developed around one technology, light water reactors, a technology that is very different than what these innovators envision. In order for these advanced technologies to thrive, they need a modern regulatory framework, one that is predictable and efficient, but flexible enough to assess a variety of technologies, all while ensuring that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission perform its primary function, and that is one of safety. Our bill seeks to modernize the NRC by providing a flexible system, one that that is shared between existing reactor operators and advanced reactor innovators, the need for timely decision making from the NRC. Our section to modernize the NRC fee recovery structure will add transparency and accountability, and I might add equity, to improve the NRC's efficient and timeliness. Altogether, these provisions represent a solid bipartisan effort to modernize the cost and regulatory frameworks and enable the development of new generations of reactors with bold new technologies. Other countries like China and Russia are proceeding to develop advanced technologies regardless of what we do here in the United States. We can't forego the advancements in reactor technology, or we forego our economic competitiveness and worldwide influence on nuclear nonproliferation. We need to enable advanced reactor innovators by providing a regular framework that is predictable and cost-effective. In a time when people question whether Congress still knows how to be bipartisan, S-2795 is proof that we can find common ground. And I have to say this. I do chair the committee. I've been the ranking member when Republicans were a minority, and so I've been on both sides. And we're a committee that does get things done quite often. When we're giving reports, I always say, now from the committee that actually does things. And we do things that are bipartisan. You know, we did the transportation reauthorization bill. That's one everyone said was not going to be done. It was the largest one since 1998. We just finished doing that. We did the chemical bill. That was one that brought us together. And as we speak, this very moment, we're doing WRDA, the Water Resources Development Act. So we are doing things together, and we'll be continuing to do that. And so now, as far as 2795 is concerned, it's a product of teamwork with all of our friends, Booker, Whitehouse, Crapo, myself. It received a strong bipartisan vote of 17-3 in the committee. That's a good indicator. And when Senator Whitehouse and I wrote an op-ed issue with Senators Booker and Crapo, we noted how these advanced nuclear technologies hold enormous promise to provide clean, safe, affordable, and reliable energy, not just for our country, but for the world. So it's our job as legislators to enable that vision, and I'm pleased to work together with Senator Whitehouse to achieve that goal. Senator Whitehouse?
Thank you, Chairman Inhofe, and thank you to Ambassador Morningstar and to Sherry Goodman and to the Atlantic Council for inviting us here for a very interesting conversation. And thank you, Ben, where you go, for moderating the conversation to follow. Last week, the Senate Energy and Water Appropriations Subcommittee held a hearing on the future of nuclear. At Chairman Alexander's invitation, I testified at that hearing about the recent bipartisan interest in advanced nuclear technologies. Unlikely partnerships have formed around this issue. You could say my work with Senator Inhofe, my chairman on the Environment Public Works Committee, is one such partnership. We do indeed come to the nuclear issue for different reasons, but it's one of several areas of bipartisan work that we've undertaken this year. As the chairman said, we have worked together on finishing a long-term highway funding bill. We just passed the Water Resources Development Act. TSCA has been signed into law. And in the context of getting those things done with Chairman Inhofe, I have come to value him as perhaps the most formidable and talented legislator in the Senate when he chooses to put his mind to getting something done. It is... he's pretty formidable and talented when he's in opposition, too, just to make that clear. I was proud to sign on to Senator Inhofe's bipartisan bill, also co-sponsored by Senators Crapo and Booker, to reform the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. As co-sponsors, we agree that NRC's current licensing framework is not designed to promote the next wave of advanced nuclear technology. Our bill would create a new advanced reactor licensing framework for concepts that are much different than today's light water reactors. It recently cleared the Chairman's Environment Public Works Committee on a vote of 17-3. The House of Representatives has just passed a similar measure as well. I'm also a co-sponsor of the Bipartisan Nuclear Energy Innovation Capabilities Act, along with Senators Hatch, Booker, Kirk, and Risch. That measure was approved 87-4 as an amendment to the broader energy bill that has passed the Senate and is now waiting in conference. This bill would create a new nuclear innovation program through the Department of Energy, a shared nuclear science clearinghouse for federal agencies and private industry. It would also open up the national labs testbed facilities to private industry to create partnerships between the federal government and academia in early stages of reactor development, fostering greater market certainty for investors. The purpose of these two bills is straightforward: drive homegrown innovation of next-generation nuclear technologies in our national labs, and put in place a regulatory framework that is better suited to licensing those technologies. We should not sit back and watch investors go to China and India to develop and commercialize the next generation of reactors. The potential advantages of advanced nuclear technology are many. New advanced reactor designs can substantially reduce the threat of a meltdown. Many new designs are much smaller than their predecessors, meaning they can be built in factories. Smaller size means they can plug into future microgrid systems, reducing the need for massive transmission system upgrades. And the holy grail for me would be advanced technologies that actually reduce the nuclear waste stockpile created by the current nuclear fleet. Research on advanced nuclear reactors will also help us address one of the most critical issues of our time, climate change. Weaning ourselves off of our carbon-intensive global energy diet will require large-scale expansion of wind, solar, smart grid, and improved energy storage technologies. According to most credible reports, that effort will have to include nuclear. Columbia University environmental economist Jeffrey Heel studied the feasible pathways to an 80% reduction of U.S. greenhouse gas emissions below 2005 levels by 2050. He found that the cheapest way to get there requires that nuclear power play a role. Likewise, the International Energy Agency projects that if we're to hold global temperature increases to just 2 degrees centigrade, nuclear will produce about 17% of the world's electricity. Advanced reactors hold great promise in a carbon-constrained world. So I'm pleased that Senator Inhofe and I have been able to find common ground on this, as well as many other issues this year. Another area that might benefit from the same bipartisan spirit is working to preserve our existing nuclear fleet in the safest possible way. It makes no sense to close a safely operating nuclear plant just because it receives no value for the zero carbon quality of its power when we know there is value to that zero carbon quality. So we will make progress where we can. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I look forward to our conversation.
Thank you, Senators. Hello, everyone. I'm Ben Gieman, reporter with National Journal, and thank you both very much for your remarks. And let's dive right in with a question I have for both of you that sort of dovetails with your remarks on the two pieces of specific legislation that you brought up. I'd like to, if we can, get the view from inside the rooms of the Capitol. You know, we've got just a few short weeks and months left in the congressional session here. To what extent do you senators see potential at the end of this Congress for final passage of the bill that cleared EPW, the Nuclear Energy Innovation and Modernization Act, or the other one that's right now hitching a ride on the bipartisan energy legislation? What are the prospects?
Well, we are talking about that now, and I think we might get two different answers here. It's my feeling that we have enough popularity of this thing that we're going to be able to move forward with it. Anytime you get something that passes our committee, as both of us stated, at 17-3, then I think that's a good sign. I have been working with the House, and as I'm sure Senator Whitehouse has, and so our problem quite often, I think you got this from the opening statement, is not so much Republican versus Democrat, but it's House versus the Senate or Senate versus the House. We've learned that it takes, so I can't really predict when that's going to be, but I think during the session that we have after the election that we have a really good chance of doing this. This is something that should pass. We ought to be able to get it done. And if we say this from our committee, it'd be like the four bills that we mentioned in our opening statements. They said that couldn't be done, but it was.
Senator, do you share that optimism or hopefulness about a lame duck session and some of the unpredictable atmospheres we find there?
I think we've got quite a good shot. The strong votes in the Environment and Public Works Committee and then on the floor for these two bills have been, I think, a really strong signal that this is bipartisan, this makes sense, we should proceed with it. And the House has been energized enough on this that they've tried to put the Inhofe, Crapo, Whitehouse, Booker bill onto the defense authorization bill. And that has run into some what you call committee jurisdictional problems in the Senate. But when you're down to dealing with committee jurisdictional issues and people seem to be comfortable on the merits, and the House is enthusiastic enough about an energy bill to try to put it under the defense authorization bill, these are all good signs. So, you know, nothing is complete in the Senate until the president actually signs it into law. But I think we're in good shape, and I think, again, I've had the experience recently of working with Chairman Inhofe to get things done, and he's a man who is formidable at getting them done. So I wouldn't underrate our chances because of our chairman. If anything, he'll make it happen.
So it sounds like everybody should be paying very careful attention to this in these kind of frenzied final weeks of the year here.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that if these do get added into whatever packages are moving at the end, they're not going to be detrimental to the passage of whatever the vehicle is. I think, if anything, they might add enthusiasm for it. So we're in a really good position.
Let me just add to that. I agree with everything he's saying on this. I've been the ranking member on the defense authorization, and we'll be passing that, and I'm being very cautious about anything I say publicly as to what could go on that. But there's an array of things that could go on.
One of the sort of things that I think has been noteworthy about the presidential election cycle is we, candidly have not seen a huge amount of discussion of energy policy writ large. We've seen some, but the role of technological innovation in the energy sector, and especially in the nuclear sector, I think has not, I don't think it was ever going to be front and center in any presidential race, but it has been very, I think it's safe to say it has not been a major part of the election. Are either of you or both of you confident that regardless of the outcome of this election, that a President Trump or a President Clinton would be on board with advanced nuclear power? I think it's especially a question perhaps around Senator Clinton, because there's a lot of kind of cross currents within the environmental movement around nuclear power, as I think we're going to discuss more later too.
I'm pretty confident that whoever the president is would want American innovation and American industry to prosper. And energy is an enormous part of the planet's economy. And if America were to decide that we were to step back from innovation in nuclear, in wind, in solar, in storage, in geothermal, in any aspect, in clean coal, in any aspect of moving forward on energy innovation, we would be doing ourselves a very conspicuous and unnecessary injury. And so I see that as a very bipartisan issue. And there are plenty of companies that want to invest in these things, and they'd be strong voices as well.
Yeah, Ben, let me disagree with you a little bit here, because maybe it's because I've been listening for it, but Trump has been quite outspoken on specifically nuclear energy and on the fact that we have an energy crisis, and he's an all of the above guy like I am, and but he's actually singled out nuclear on several occasions. So I think he's been outspoken on that.
And one of the things I find so interesting about this topic is the sort of need and interest in this legislation set up against the sort of current projections on the share of nuclear power. I mean, if you look at the Energy Information Administration projections, they see a largely sort of flat or declining role. How important would these two pieces of legislation be, because if you look at the sort of spectrum of different things that could affect the nuclear industry, obviously appropriations legislation on funding for research. If you look at the sort of smorgasbord of policy considerations out there, how important would these particular bills to reform the NRC licensing process and the second legislation that's now in the energy bill that would look at work with the labs and private industry, how much do you think that these two bills combined, if enacted into law, could sort of knock the path of that trajectory in another direction that we've seen?
Well, this bill that we're talking about now is to accommodate this move forward, this transition into the future. I mean, we've been, with water-cooled reactors now, and that's it. And so we have an NRC that is geared just for that. And it's not working all that well even just for that technology, but as you move into something that could be fuel, or it could get into a whole new realm, it's obvious that you're going to have to restructure the licensing process of the NRC, and that's one of the two things we're doing with this bill. Now, the other thing is there's been a problem, obviously, when they recover 90%. There's a problem with that I think we both would agree. A lot of the companies end up, if you have a reactor that is gone under and it's gone, then those that remain have to pick up the cost of those that are there. And so there's an equity problem there too. So those are the two major things that we're addressing. So I'd say we're accommodating the things that we want to do in the future.
If I may briefly follow up on that, Senator, in your discussions with the NRC, either at the kind of staff level or with Chairman Burns or others, to what extent do you sense that they are sort of open and interested in seeing this type of new structure sort of adopted by the NRC? I mean, would it be a kicking and screaming situation, or would it be a welcoming?
Well, you're probably
with open
asking the
arms?
wrong person, and I think you'll get different responses on this.
Yeah.
As a general rule, the bureaucracy doesn't want to change.
Yeah.
In fact, when I became chairman of the subcommittee 20 years ago that addresses this, they'd gone 4 years, right? 4 years since they've had an oversight committee. 4 years. You can't turn a bureaucracy loose and not look at what they're doing for 4 years because you know what's going to happen, nothing. And so I think that, I'm not saying it's going to be kicking and screaming, but I think that as a general rule, bureaucracies don't want to change. And this is going to require a change in attitude or not an accusation, but a recognition that the same procedure is not going to work for the new reactor technology as has somewhat worked in the past.
Senator Whitehouse, what's your sense of that? Do you think that there is an openness among the regulators, either at the kind of political level or at the kind of bureaucratic level, to be able to kind of adopt a sort of a licensing process that's more adept to the sort of next generation of different types of reactors, small modular reactors, or do you sort of feel like there's a level of kind of inertia there that would create difficulties in kind of sort of implementing any types of reform to the licensing process?
I agree with Senator Inhofe that there's often a native inertia to the bureaucratic process, but I think the bureaucratic process is also responsive to strong bipartisan signals from the Congress that funds them and that can make oversight hearings pleasant or very unpleasant. And the kind of strong bipartisan signal that these bills are sending, plus the support of the technical community that is seeking to invest in these technologies, I think sends a signal that they simply can't afford not to listen to. And so I don't think they'll be reluctant or grumbling about it. It may be more work than they're used to, but I think they'll see that this is an inevitable path and they have to get there.
You know, let me just follow up a little bit on that. I agree with him. And I think maybe I wasn't being as kind as I should to that particular bureaucracy, but we went through that once before. I found 20 years ago when we had the big hearing, the first oversight hearing in 4 years, that they were receptive. In fact, the chairman at that time came to me afterwards and he said, "We've needed this. We need to have direction." And so that very likely would be the case.
Yeah. And remember, we're dealing right now, as you pointed out earlier, Ben, with an industry that appears to be dying on the numbers. And when you look at the perfectly safely operating nuclear plants that are being shut down because they can't redeem their carbon-free value, you know, that curve goes even more steeply downward. So you have an industry that I think, you know, urgently needs to turn around. And my view is that it's a 3-stage rocket. The first stage is when we can clear the regulatory process so that it actually supports these new technologies and America wants to get in the game. That's stage 1. Stage 2 is if we get some kind of carbon pricing, which many companies already do internally, so it doesn't matter. It's going to show up in decision making. Canada's doing it. So as that begins to intrude into the decision making, it'll support nuclear because it makes it a winner in that equation. And the third piece, again, if we can get to a place where these technologies allow us to burn through the existing nuclear waste stockpiles, nobody knows exactly what the true cost of that waste as waste is on our society and on the future. If we can reduce or eliminate that cost, that's worth perhaps even trillions of dollars.
I wanted to, thank you. I wanted to stay on the topic of carbon for a moment. You know, from where I sit, I have not seen a lot of interest in the kind of larger mainstream environment, or really in the environmental movement across the board. I have not seen much interest in embracing nuclear power. I thought it was very interesting that James Hansen, of course, the pioneering climate scientist, you know, ahead of the Paris climate negotiations, put out a call along with some other scientists saying essentially, look, to avoid blowing too far past the 2-degree threshold and to realistically knock global emissions onto a sustainable path, we're going to need a very wide deployment of nuclear power. He got a lot of blowback for that. And so I guess my question, Senator, is do you see an ability or a potential there to bring an environmental movement that is right now at best agnostic and largely, frankly, anti-nuclear toward being in favor of nuclear power as part of the climate solution?
I think so. I mean, if you are serious about what CO2 concentrations are doing in our atmosphere and in our oceans, you've got to be serious about it. And if you're serious about the need for power as the entire world develops to greater levels of economic wealth and prosperity, then you've got to walk through how you get there. And nobody that I'm aware of thinks that there's a path there for the world without some element of nuclear power. And then you get those added bonuses, which is what if it becomes a solution for going through our nuclear waste? And we don't have another solution. I mean, what are we going to do? Throw it in the ocean? Going to bury it in Yucca Mountain? I don't see those things happening. So,
why then, oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Why then, given the case you just outlined, sir, why is the environmental movement remaining so resistant?
Well, a lot of folks in the environmental movement cut their teeth against nuclear power because of nuclear waste. And I opened my career fighting against nuclear power plants because they were going out of cost control, and huge rate increases were being put through to customers, and I was fighting against those rate increases. So there are lots of people who have a history of nuclear that relates to that past that shadows and colors their perception, I think, of where we are now. But particularly if you can get this to a place where it's a solution to the nuclear waste problem rather than augmenting the nuclear waste problem, then I think the calculus begins to shift pretty dramatically.
Yeah, Ben, let me weigh in on this. You guys should all be aware that it took a lot of courage for this guy to do this. You know, I look at the clean power plan that the president's talking about. He said he's going to have a 26 to 28% reduction in the emissions by 2025 or whatever it is. And he comes out with this elaborate plan, and it doesn't have any nuclear in it. It's just absurd. And so there are a lot of them that look in the environmentalist movement who don't like nuclear. But you can't get there where he wants to go, where I don't want to go, but he wants to go, without using nuclear. And so when Andy came and he said they've invited me to come up here and speak with Whitehouse, I thought, this is going to be fun. What's the subject? And then when they told me, I said, I was so enthusiastic about it. I said, call him back right now and say yes. So, because I think, you know, this is, what you're viewing right now is very important. We got to have nuclear in this country. We got to have it. And we have nuclear technology, other sources that we're using other than just the water. And we know that China's doing it. We know that Russia's doing it. We know that France is doing it. And if we want to stay ahead, we've got to be doing it. And we should have done it before now, but we're doing it now. And we're doing it right with the right mix of people in the right committee, and we're going to get it done.
Senator, following up on that, thank you. A sort of flip side of the question I had for Senator Whitehouse, for you, if Republicans had a different stance on the urgency of addressing climate change, wouldn't that then lead more political support in Washington for, be it on funding or be it on policy or be it on the NRC, wouldn't that lend more political support for nuclear innovation if Republicans had a largely different posture on climate change?
I don't think so. I think, you know, the Republicans are pretty outspoken right now on being pro-nuclear. And in fact, I don't know of any exceptions to that. So we talk about it, and that's why I didn't mean to, I wasn't correcting you, but when you were talking about Trump, I remember so many times that he has actually used the words and talked about specifically nuclear. So I think so long as we as Republicans on a partisan basis are very much in favor of nuclear, I'm not sure that they would make it a stronger argument.
Thank you.
And for me, just to step into Senator Inhofe's wheelhouse for a moment, if we can get to where we need to get in terms of our world energy portfolio with renewables, the market can dictate that, and that can happen. That doesn't strand the investment in new nuclear technology as a wasted effort, because among other things, we have nuclear carriers, we have nuclear submarines, we have military uses for nuclear, and we want to make sure that our men and women in uniform out there operating these pieces of equipment have the best and safest power supply that they can. And so that's kind of our worst case scenario, is that we're staying even or ahead of the Chinese and others in terms of how we power our very significant military platforms.
Exactly right. And putting on my Senate Armed Services hat, you know, we can't do it without nuclear. We can't be competitive. So that's it. It fits.
We've got some time for audience questions as well. We've got a microphone, I think, that's roving around here. Is there anyone in the audience who, I see a couple hands here. How about, let's start right here in the front row with the ambassador.
Coming up behind you.
You've talked about issues with respect to the NRC. You've talked about issues with NGOs. What about local politics? How, if we come up with commercialized advanced nuclear technologies, will it be acceptable, and do you anticipate that it can be a major factor in our mix? Or is it enough that the research be done, that the research become commercialized, and even if it doesn't have much of an effect in the United States, it could have a huge effect in a country like China to make nuclear cost competitive with coal and lead to lesser emissions? Is that enough?
Siting issues are always going to be significant. Those are always local concerns. I think if you're dealing with relatively small, modular, modern reactors, they could be sized to a military base so that they go right in and provide the power for a local facility like that, that I think people would have a fair amount of confidence that the military would know how to run that. They've done it with submarines and with aircraft carriers for quite a long time. And then there's the existing plants, which could be transitioned over to new technologies. They've got all the wiring and everything in place, and folks have already accustomed themselves to those areas being sites. So clearly there always are going to be siting issues, but I think there are also going to be ways around them and ways to meet them in ways that don't create such a blowback against the entire innovation that it doesn't have any use.
Ambassador, I suspect that part of your question was in the local politics. Now, we have two different states that we represent here. My job is going to be a lot easier than his, I suspect, in terms of there's no center of resistance to nuclear power in my state of Oklahoma. It's something that's always been, it's never gone through a negative phase in some parts of the country, in the eastern part of the country. I think it has.
It has.
And so I'd say it's, you know, it'll be easier for me than for some others.
I think we saw some on this side, on the left side, my left side here in the second row.
Hello, my name is Lenka Kolar from New Scale Power. First of all, thank you very much for your support for nuclear innovation. We really appreciate it. My question is about when this act does pass and the NRC starts to modernize their process, how will that affect advanced nuclear designs that may have already submitted their design certification?
Well, I would say that we've taken that into consideration in drafting the bill. And then there are not specific outlines exactly what we're going to do to change a process as it might affect reactors that are different than the water-cooled reactors that we're using today. So it's not that detailed. It's just saying that we're going to respond to the need as the need arises so that we can be not just competitive, but leaders in advanced technology. So I think it's going to be I think we worded it with that in mind.
To add to that, I think the test, I think, for us as to whether this has succeeded or not is whether the NRC is dedicating itself to adapting its approval process to the technologies as they present themselves, rather than sitting back with an approval process that is designed for yesterday's technology. If it were the Automobile Regulatory Commission and it had really specific standards for carburetors, Elon Musk and his Tesla would have a real problem with getting through the carburetor test. And so you'd need to change the way in which you demanded your testing regime to comply, to perform, in order to meet the new technology that was coming in. I think that's all that we're asking. Don't ask the Tesla to have to meet a carburetor standard. Meet these new technologies where they are.
And I think we had, let's go on to the other side of the aisle here in the second row. We had a couple questions.
Thank you. Hi, Stephen Dawley. I'm a reporter with Platts. I edit our newsletter Inside NRC. Senator Inhofe, you mentioned the importance of NRC being able to efficiently conduct its work, but for over a year now, first one and now two seats on the 5-member commission have been vacant. Have you heard anything from the White House about your proposal that Annie Caputo be appointed to the commission? And do you plan to hold hearings before the election on the nomination of Jesse Roberson to the commission?
What my effort has been is a little bit further than that. I would say that since we have 2 vacancies, that we be sure that we have an opportunity for me and for Senator Whitehouse to have our input on both of them. What I wouldn't want is to have nominations come down that would be the same ones from the same side or the same philosophy. As you know, with Senator Reid having a background in disposal, that's become obvious. When we get new members on, we want to be sure we have a blend. We want some that are, not 2 that are exactly alike. So I've just wanted to make sure that if we have Annie in there, that we have somebody else on the other side that would be maybe have not the same exact philosophy. I think I said that right.
Have you heard anything from the White House, though, about that?
No.
I think going back to the other side, there's a gentleman in the 3rd row on the far side here. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Gilbert Brown. I'm a longtime professor at UMass Lowell, kind of in the neighborhood.
Kind of in the neighborhood.
Understand the dynamics of the East, which is not the same as the Southeast, so where nuclear is viewed a little more favorably, I believe. So my question is, in our discussion about nuclear and issues associated with it, it's not like the alternatives don't have issues too. I mean, siting windmills is not the easiest thing in the world either.
But we did it in Rhode Island.
Understood. But we all have challenges, so all the above needs to address all the challenges, not just the nuclear challenges. But my question is a little more specific, and maybe I missed it. The existing plants are under stress for different reasons. These market reasons, not valuing the reliability that it adds to the whole network of delivering electricity, not to mention the CO2. In this licensing reform, is there going to be any way to help the regulatory burden that these existing plants still live under? I mean, it's very expensive proposition just to maintain a plant under the existing regulatory structure, and I guess the word overkill is probably not the right phrase, but
Sounds like we've got a question about the capacity of the regulators to...
yeah, does this affect the way the existing plants will be treated in their regulatory environment? Is that part of the thrust?
For me, not directly. It's really to open it up to the new technologies, the next generation of nuclear technology. For me, the ways to solve the problem of carbon-free, reliable baseload power that is just being turned off even though the plant is perfectly safe is through either adjusting the way in which the ISOs pay for the capacity that it provides. Sure. In New England, we have a market model where that goes out to bid, and so that's reasonably, good. But it wasn't enough to save Vermont Yankee. So the second thing you have to turn to is, if you believe that carbon-free power has a value in its carbon-free nature, then we ought to pay for that. And 2 courts have upheld the Obama administration's social cost of carbon, and in fact demanded its application in their decisions. So we have a very logical prerequisite there, basically, that's been met to say we should be able to pay these nuclear plants that equivalent, if we could find a source of money, to continue to operate. They should get the benefit of what they're doing. If we, in other places, are willing to talk about charging people for the harm, then here we ought to be prepared to compensate them for the benefit, and that only seems fair. And currently it's about $42 per ton emitted, and from what I understand, these plants would be profitable at that level. In fact, some would be maybe over, people might be complaining about windfalls. So I think there's a solution to be had to that problem without getting into the regulatory problem, and are you making them less safe, and are you making them less secure, and do people have concern about that? I think that's a dangerous area to go into in terms of public acceptance.
But I think also that, you know, we hear a lot of complaints, and a lot of people testify and come into our committee and talk about how they don't like the way the NRC has been handling their regulations and their applications, their licensing. And we know that that's just going to be even worse when you get into new technologies. And I think that one of the two major changes we want to make is with the flexibility that we can have to accommodate those when they come in. If we got a problem now, it'd be more serious later. And we want to solve that before that technology arrives.
Hear, hear.
I think we've got a gentleman in the second row here with the microphone. Thank you.
Thank you. Paul Gunter, Beyond Nuclear. I'd like to ask the senators, since you've drawn such a sharp contrast between current light water reactors and particularly the safety claim for the advanced reactors, do you see the innovation and technology you're proposing to actually make changes in the limited liability established right now under Price-Anderson?
That's not part of the bill, and frankly, I haven't thought that through enough to have a position on it. What I will say is that I've been repeatedly presented with technologies that by design are incapable of going critical and that are inherently more safe than the existing model. And I think if that proves out to be true, that in fact they are proof against going critical, then that makes for a dramatically reduced risk profile for them, and that's to the good for everyone.
Go ahead.
Well, I was thinking before we run out of time, I think that we want to address the current status of this thing. You know, we've hotlined the bill. I mean, the question would be, what are the chances of getting this thing done? What we didn't mention, or I didn't mention in one of your first questions, is that we on the Republican side have hotlined it. We don't have a problem. There's no resistance there. There's one hold, and that's Senator Feinstein from California. I think that's been publicized, and people are aware of that. And her major reason is, as stated by her, that it doesn't, she wants the waste to be addressed. Well, the waste is not even a part of this bill. And so I would think that we ought to be able to get through, and with a lot of other people who, maybe even in this room, who equally want this to happen, let's make that real clear, yeah, we can address that issue, but that's not a part of this bill. But that is the only thing that's out there right now that is stopping it.
I see another question, and it looks like the third or fourth row here.
Yes, thank you, Senators. I applaud your efforts. I think it's a significant and important and necessary first step to get this new technology out into the marketplace and commercialized. As a former director of one of the small modular reactor development companies, I understand what it takes to get private sector investment into the significant cost new technology, nuclear technology development. And I realize that this is a little bit off topic, but I think we have to look as a next step, or maybe the third step, how do we compete globally? How do we need to do anything with our export control process? We're competing with sovereign companies that are funding these nuclear plants, and we're competing with them overseas. Now, I'm not suggesting we do the same thing, but I think all the licensing effort will be for naught if you can't get the private sector investments, which is significant when they look at the global market as opposed to strictly the domestic market. Is there any thinking on that?
Well, I think one of the benefits of what we're trying to do here is to open it up so that the market out there is going to be aware that we're going to be creating an environment that's going to be a lot easier for the new innovations to come in. To me, that would be a positive thing to encourage investment from outside. At least that was a byproduct that we talked about in developing this bill.
If, as you know better than I do, if you're a private sector investor and you're being presented a business plan that has a ginormous X factor in the middle of it that has no known bounds, which is the regulatory approval cost, that's a pretty discouraging element in the formula. So we hope that this will encourage private investment by reducing the range, at least, of that X factor. I think if you're going to move into trying to figure out ways for the government to subsidize domestic investment in this technology so that it can be propagated more around the country, you're going to run into the Ex-Im Bank problem.
I know the senators have got a hard stop. Do we have time, I think, for one more question? And there's a, oh, and I see it a few rows back over here.
Eric Jacobson, Columbia University. Thank you guys for joining us for this important issue. My question is in regards to advanced technologies. Senator Whitehouse, you mentioned that this is really a three-stage rocket. So after we install a new or improved regulatory environment, would it not also be beneficial to send a signal that we need to get more serious about this technology and restart the integral fast reactor that was canceled by Congress in '94?
I don't want to comment on an individual project, but I do think that having the regulation adapt to the new technologies as they come in sends a good signal. Finding a way to value the carbon-free nature of the power of nuclear sends a very good signal. And being more thoughtful about pricing what it is actually costing us right now to sit on that nuclear waste stockpile so that we have a number to work against and target the economic value of drawing that down and repurposing it to a beneficial purpose of providing electricity. I think those are some of the steps that would show, that I'd like to follow, that would show we're serious.
And I think we are going to make that the last word. Senators, thank you very much for
Well, my last word is thank you to my chairman.
Yeah, but thank you. Thank you.
Let me thank Senator
Very good,
Inhofe
Ben.
and
Thank you.
Whitehouse for your leadership in ushering in a new era of nuclear innovation and modernization that is vitally important for our national and environmental security and our global competitiveness. Let me also thank Ben for moderating this, and let me thank Ambassador Morningstar, Tom, and the Global Energy Center here at the Atlantic Council, which is doing a terrific job in being the go-to place on all things energy and climate and leading the way. Thank you very much.